If you were to summarize the kind of heart of what you wanted people to walk away with this weekend, what would it be?
Yeah, that's good. So yeah, I think it's the question that I think Mark is trying to get all of us to answer, which is, who is Jesus to you, really? You know, who is Jesus? So I think about it like, it's a question that I think we can answer pretty easily, especially Christians. Jesus, Son of God, Messiah, all of this. It's fairly simple. But who is he to you, really? Like, functionally, how does he function in your life? Does he actually occupy the place that you believe in your life, that you believe him to be? So if you would say Jesus is Lord, but do you actually live like that's true? You know, do you make decisions about money like that's true, about ethics like that's true, about your marriage like that's true? Like, do you really submit to, I mean, I'm not talking about being perfect. I'm just talking about, so here's a for instance. We get people from time to time, unfortunately happens more commonly than you'd like to admit, who show up to the church and it's like, well, they've been in marriage trouble. It's like, we're going to get a divorce. Okay, well, tell us what's going on. And it's just, well, we're just not getting along, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, biblically, you don't have there's not biblical basis for divorce here. Well, we're going to get divorced. It's like, how is Jesus Lord there? How do you, essentially what you're saying is, yeah, I know I want to do what I'm going to do. I need, and it's usually, honestly, in marriage situations like that, it's usually one against the other, sometimes a wife, sometimes a husband. It's just, I'm ready to be done. I'm going to move on. Or I've got someone else that happens. And you're just like, how's this work with your faith? I don't understand it. Who is Jesus to you? And that's a real specific example, but I think that happens in a lot of ways with people who would name Jesus as Lord or profess him to be divine, but rarely really wrestle with, wait a minute, like, who is he? Who functionally, who is he in my life?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the question I'd love for people to wrestle with.
Okay.
I think that's what Mark 2 is, really the book of Mark is inviting you to wrestle with, but Mark 2, you kind of face with that head on.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How does Mark specifically challenge us to, understand or wrestle with who Jesus is?
Well, it seems to me that he just keeps putting forward, or maybe Jesus is doing this. That's the thing, is like, he's just recounting stories from Peter that happened. So Jesus just keeps putting himself, and Mark is recording this, just keeps putting himself in positions of conflict with humanity, which I actually really like. Like, he's just showing up as Lord of the Sabbath, or I'm going to call who I want to be my disciples. Like, I'm God. And he just keeps... He just doesn't stop, and it doesn't stop with chapter 2. I mean, you can read forward. He just keeps, to the point that, as we're going to find out, I mean, in the beginning of chapter 3, he violates them, if you will, their expectations, their agenda, what would I call it, their paradigm for who Jesus can be, or a man can be, or even Messiah could be. So much so that they're like, we're going to kill him. Yeah, we are going to kill this guy. He is so wrong. And he's kind of relentless. He just doesn't stop. He keeps, and I think this is kind of a fun thing. Maybe we could talk about this, but he just keeps forcing conflict. And I think that is what Jesus does. He just won't be ignored, if you will.
Do you think that that's like something that he is trying to do, or it's just happening as a consequence of who he is?
I mean, I think it's probably a little of both.
Okay.
And I think it's a healthy thing. Like, I think any good counselor, when they see things in you, they're gonna bring you to a point of decision. So we're gonna go meet with a kind of a consultant, but he's really so much more than that. He's a friend, mentor. I call him like a facilitator. It's just been working with us for, nearly a decade now. And one of the things that makes him so good at what he does is he's able to kind of bring to a head conversations that need to be had. For us, it's a lot of it's organizational, but even relational, how we're relating to one another, pastors, leaders, all this kind of stuff. Because you know this, we all know this, in relationship, stuff gets unsaid, feelings get ambiguous, and there can be tension, even if it's not super negative. It's just stuff's left unstated, unsaid, that if not addressed is eventually going to cause some real problems. And so he just has this way of just like, let's make that decision. Like he just brings it to the forefront and doesn't let you just kind of hit the ignore button. But like, no, what are we going to do about that? Instead of just kind of kicking it, because we all, don't we? We have a tendency to just kind of kick things
down the road, just a little bit.
Just not deal with it right now. Don't want to even think about that. And Jesus just kind of has a way of surfacing stuff where it's like, I'm kind of confronted with this. And you can kind of, I think that's part of what we're going to talk about. I think the crowds are maybe a group of people that experience Jesus but don't really allow him to kind of penetrate deeply enough into their lives to really be confronted with that. I do think a lot of people try to live that way. But yeah, I think he is doing some of that. Maybe it's a bit of both, on purpose, and it's just who he is. It's the nature of who he is.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go. I don't know if this is like just a neuroticism in me, but I kind of want to go in order. Okay. So the Pharisees,
So the
religious leaders,
the crowds, and the paralytic and his friends.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely okay. It's the way I outlined the sermon.
Okay, so let's talk about the religious leaders and why does Jesus make them so angry?
Well, this is the hardest one for me to even wrap my mind around. And like this, like how do we relate to this? Because I want to see us in each of these categories. Where do we find? It's too easy to read the Bible and think about they, them, what they do, never really seeing that I do the same thing. And so I kind of refuse to read the stories that way without seeing myself in each of these types of people. Or a tendency maybe within my, the human heart. So I was really wrestling with this. Like, what does it mean? How do you like to be religious in this way? What's really going on here? So he seems to be confronting, or maybe not confronting, but circumventing their authority, their power, their position. In some sense, I think their ego, pride, and potentially social privilege. They are the ones who are making the rulings for the common folks about what they can and can't do. They're kind of the game masters, if you will, the keepers of the rules, the ones who get to tell you whether or not you're right with God or who's doing it the right way and who's doing it the wrong way. And he just defies them openly and challenges their hypocrisy in ways that I think would demand a kind of humility from them that they're just unwilling to give. They're unwilling to relinquish their position of control and power. And so kind of how I related that this weekend is like, okay, how is it that when I am confronted with the living Jesus, am I fine with him as long as he's not challenging my right to control and position? So I want a Jesus of my own making, a Jesus who allows me to maintain my reputation, who doesn't make me humble myself too much, who doesn't challenge me in the areas where I really need to change or be addressed. Just to kind of is more of an encourager, more of a keep going, you're going to get there, I'm for you, I'm with you. And quite frankly, I think whether culturally or even within the church, unfortunately, I think that is... It's pretty easy to hear that from a lot of sermons and messages and so forth.
So I'm thinking about a way that we could potentially bring this idea home to people.
Great.
Just a scenario that we could place ourselves in.
Okay.
An area where you believe yourself to be the expert. Is there something like, is it mountain biking or...
Oh, I don't know.
I don't think you would. I think you would not say that you're the expert. But
Right.
yeah, I'm thinking of an area where we would feel like,
Proficient?
this is my domain.
Okay.
Like, I know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
And then this young guy comes
along and
on the
challenges
scene.
you.
And not even like overtly, but he teaches, and the people around him say, whoa, this guy teaches like someone who has authority, not like the
scribes and
religious
Pharisees, right.
leaders. And so how humiliating
No kidding.
would it be to have some young upstart?
So you kind of have this David Saul thing going on,
Yeah.
don't you, here? It's
Oh,
like,
a little bit,
Saul
yeah.
has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s, and Saul hates it because he's taking credit away from him. And in some sense, that's exactly what's happening here. Jesus he's I think what's interesting is Jesus is not just claiming to know the road to life. He is claiming to be life itself. And again throughout all of this, he's just like, he's greater than the Sabbath. He's greater, like he is the end of, so where is it? Romans 11, for from him, through him, and to him are all things. Think about that for a second. The origin, what is the word I'm looking for? Sustained. It's being so he is both. He is the origin of things. He's the sustainer of things. He's the source, the sustainer, and the end, the goal, the point of everything comes from him, and he behaves that way. And man, I mean, that would just be. So I think that it taking it's in a sense robbing me of where I might find worth, value, identity, ego, power, all of it. He strips a lot of that away, and boy, talk about a quick way to make someone angry.
Yeah. Okay, so bear with me here.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how that might relate to Jesus and you, that relationship might bring some tension. But I'm thinking about who might find themselves most, I don't know, like the seat of the religious leaders is where they could find the most kind of relatability to this sermon. And where there might be a scenario that somebody could pop up and kind of offend their preconceived notions of how maybe this church thing is supposed to work, or how a Sunday morning is supposed to look, or how Christianity culturally is supposed to look within our context. And there could be somebody that came along and said, you know what, I have an idea. What if we ...
Yeah.
And
so this is a tension I live with. So I think there is a tendency, getting real specific, within the human heart, I think this applies to a lot of folks, to want to be certain about everything. There's a safety and certainty. I know the answers. I know what the Lord would do, what he would not do, or how he says he wants it done, or so forth. So let's talk about like doctrine, let's say. We're talking like foundational bedrock faith stuff. Sure. Okay, so like there are things that I hold to be true. And yet I'm going to be careful with this because I'm not trying to say there are no borders or boundaries to belief, but I try to hold with a loose hand where I think God is working and where he is not working. And being overly critical or judgmental of people, churches, pastors, who do it differently than I do. And I have my criticisms. I mean, I've voiced some of them on here, it's like, so I feel some of this stuff, but on the other hand, I try to operate with a certain level of humility to realize like, I'm not their judge, and I'm not the one who's kind of orchestrating all of this. And so I try to kind of, I don't know, hold, I guess, things I think are true and what I believe, but also at the same time do so with a degree of humility, realizing that God works through lots of different kinds of people. And he's not counting on me to sort of sit over everybody and say, you're in, you're out, you're doing it right, you're doing it wrong. And I think there's this illusion that somehow I can get it all right, that somehow I could arrive at some place of perfect doctrine, theology, that I'm going to understand everything. And I just think, I think that's a pretty dangerous place to be. You wind up in what's called legalism, the certainty about your beliefs, your positions on everything. This is how much, this is what you can, this is what you can't do. And I think religious people, a certain kind of religious person, and there's errors on both sides, right? One of them is just like, we get hyper fixated on that and super certain. And then you have another group of people who say, none of it matters. What is most important is that we just love one another. And that's also an error on that side as well.
We've gone over this before, but this idea of theological triage is important to understand. It's those 4 categories that we kind of return to over and over again. And it's the die for, divide for, debate for, and decide for. So these die for issues are the close-handed issues of our faith. And so that's not what you're talking about here.
No, I'm not saying you should remain, the I and
so like the resurrection or
that I maybe just don't know.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I am saying like where on some kind of, let's say, debate and decide for issues, I maybe have some disagreements with people. And maybe there's even, people that are known ministers and whatever public figures and this and that I'm just like, I don't really like what they're saying here. But I think one of the dangers of all of that is to start to roll your eyes at people, to look down on them. Well, they're just not doing it the right way. They, whatever. And to think that God isn't using them at all, even folks that I have fairly strong disagreements with on, again, certain not divide and die for issues, maybe divide but not die.
Yeah.
And so at any rate, I try to have a certain degree of humility about all of that when it comes to it. I don't think it means like I need to be best friends with these folks or go, let's be in some kind of deep partnership together. But I don't know. It helps me. Before the Lord, kind of have the posture of, look, I'm following you.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow where you're leading, and I'm going to leave the rest up to you. I'm not going to get so bent out of shape about what's happening all over the place. Again, you would see it's happened a lot. Leaders standing up with kind of a bone to pick, an axe to grind against movements or groups of people within the body of Christ, and making that their kind of pet issue. And those people are generally pretty angry, seeming. There's always upset with something.
Yeah. I like what Gary Brashears used to say to us. He talked about how we should be focused more on what we're for rather than what we're against. And so just emphasizing those things like the lordship of Jesus, like the things that we can unapologetically say and make those the loudest things, the headlines, rather than having
I think what that means is I think I want to be cheering people on toward the things that, so even within our own congregation, I would have disagreements with certain theological aspects of people's backgrounds and preferences and speakers and authors and so forth that they read and listen to, and I'd be like, not so much for me. I don't buy that. And that's okay. I think that's part of what can happen within a church community. My heart and posture has been, I don't want to get up on stage and really focus on the areas where I think we might disagree and harp on people, trying to bend them to my will and get them in the same place that I'm at. I would rather cheer them on toward the things that I think are worthy of praise and what would I call them? Just things that are worthy of focus and attention, and so namely that would be the gospel, lordship of Jesus, those types. So I focus far more on that. I heard Ray Ortlund say several years ago, maybe 2020, I heard this was so helpful for me. Because not even my dad and I agree on every little thing. And I was thinking in that season, am I the right person to lead Church on the Move? It had been really tough 3 years up to that point of leadership, and I was questioning a lot of things. Maybe I'm the wrong guy. Maybe I'm doing it, I want to do it. And so I heard him say on a podcast, well, I wasn't even there, but he was talking to pastors, particularly pastors in this case, who had stepped into new churches. And he said, listen, whatever points of disagreement you may have with the congregation or the previous pastor on maybe certain things that were taught, he said this, something like this. He said, if do not spend all of your time, don't spend your time trying to correct those people. You'll do yourself and them no good. He said, more so your job is to focus on cheering them on toward the areas of agreement and what we really want to be focused on. He said, if the congregation, if they were off, and I'm not saying this about my dad that he was off, but I thought this point was good. He said, if it was off before you got there, he said, rest assured it will still be off a little bit after you've given them your very best. In other words, there is no such thing as a perfect congregation or a perfect doctrine or that we've figured it out or somehow that I become the arbiter of what is truth. I've got it all figured out. I'm certain about everything. And I think that's one surefire way to miss Christ, is to just be so certain about everything and to be really dogmatic towards people who you know are wrong. And I don't think we represent Christ well that way. And in this case, he said, you'll do nothing but invalidate people's experience of things that God did in previous seasons that maybe you see a little differently. All you'll do by trying to correct certain things is just for people to go, wait a minute, was that God? It doesn't help them. And I thought that was a really good word. So I've tried to kind of preach and pastor and lead that way from that point forward.
Yeah. I think that's a really good pastoral word for sure. You said this weekend that Christianity ought to come with a warning label.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think our idea of Christianity in our kind of time is this sort of belief that I'm going to kind of hold to. Jesus is the Son of God, died for my sins, rose from the dead. So it's kind of a do you or do you not believe that that's historically true? And if you do believe that that's true, somehow like giving, like mental assent to it. Sure, yes, I believe that. Then that's kind of how we think of Christianity, sort of detaching that from actions or what we might call allegiance to Jesus. So belief and allegiance in our time have been separated. What's his name? Who wrote the book Allegiance Alone?
Is it Matthew Bates?
Yes.
Okay.
So he wrote a book about this, and I think there's some good points on this, and that your faith should be marked by allegiance, devotion to Christ. That somehow kind of like an ethereal sort of abstract. Do you believe that that's true? Sure, but I'm not living in any way like that. It is not your works or your life or your morals are not what saves you. They are the indicator of a greater devotion and allegiance. And if I can find no indication that you believe that Jesus is Lord, then you don't believe that Jesus is Lord. And to me, that seems plain as day when I read through the New Testament. Passages like 1 John 4, other places where if you love me, what is that? John 14, keep my commandments. There's a lot of places where it seems pretty clear to me that your actions, Lord, Lord, many will come to me on that day and say, Lord, Lord, did we not cast out demons in your name? Depart from me, I never knew you. There's this disconnect between allegiance and just what we would simply call belief. So when I say warning label attached, I say that strategically so that people would be confronted with, it's sort of like doing P90X. I remember when I did this years ago, a decade ago. I had heard about it before. Everybody had said it was just brutal. And it was like, if you're going to embark on this, you better know what you're signing up for. This is no average workout. You're going to absolutely punish yourself, but it's going to be so good for you, over these next 90 days. And I kind of like that sort of call to like, who's willing to like take the hard path. And so I like putting forward this notion of warning label because I actually think the shoving it, like you don't want this, you're not ready for this, putting it back in people's face actually makes them go, no, I do. It's like, I'm doing that on purpose. It's like, I want you to do the hard thing. I want you to surrender to this giving up of yourself and so forth. So I like that kind of warning label because I even think sort of Americans are kind of like, anti-warning label. You telling me I can't do something? Let's do it. So I like that. I want to put it in front of people so that it would kind of make them, like, it's just too easy to dismiss Christianity. That's the reason. It's so easy to just, it becomes this kind of, I don't know, no edges.
Yeah.
It doesn't cut me.
Yeah.
It doesn't challenge me.
So what
it doesn't,
would you
demand anything of me. It's not yelling at me. It's super soft. You got this Jesus with a couple fingers raised. You know what I'm talking about? The paintings. Like, he's just not threatening at all. And I think Christianity with a warning label and describing Christ as this sort of threatening figure, threatening to your status quo, is actually really attractive.
So what would you say to the person who doesn't feel like, who follows, so would say that they're a Jesus follower, but doesn't feel challenged by Jesus?
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be a fun conversation to sit down and talk about, what does your practice of Christianity then look like?
Yeah.
How are you spending time with him? What does that look like for you?
Maybe a better question would be, how does Jesus challenge you? Like, where is he confronting you?
Yeah. So for me, it's the scripture. That's just me. But when I read through the scripture, and I have to think, and it's not just quickly, I have to think a lot about what he's saying, and what the implications of what I'm reading actually are. So it takes me quite a while to really consider that. And then think about, okay, like, I'm unwilling, I'm not going to say I'm perfect at this, because by no means, I by no means am. But I have a hard time with the idea of preaching something that I'm not living or I am unwilling to do. That I would ask the congregation to do something. So when we talk about prepare the way of the Lord a couple of weeks ago, I was like, I've got to sit down and think about this, like, and get specific with it. I can't just sort of, oh yeah, that's good for y'all, I'm not going to do it. So for me, that's where I'll start to think about, again, reading scripture, contemplating what it means, and then trying to think about how that might confront me and change me, and where I might be acting in a hypocritical manner. Yeah.
Let's talk about the crowds.
Okay.
Yeah. How did we come to the conclusion that the crowds are like almost a character?
Yeah. Well, so I got that. So Seth, our pastor at West, was the first one to kind of post something about this in kind of our group chat. It comes from a commentary, J.R. Edwards. I quoted him this weekend, so I gave him credit for the idea. But yeah, he's the one that pointed it out, that the crowds serve as a character. And boy, as you keep reading through the Gospel of Mark, you do see this. I encourage the congregation this weekend, as you're reading, think about that. Notice, pay attention, maybe underline crowds, many, lots of people were gathered. Notice and what do the crowds do? What is their function? How does Mark describe them? You get a lot of this in chapter 3. I started reading chapter 3 in depth this morning, and you'll see a lot of the crowds in chapter 3 and not portrayed particularly positively. So yeah, that's where the idea came from, this idea of crowds as a character. But what happened is I started thinking about that. I started realizing that it's when people step out of the crowd, and you're going to see that happen a lot. There are a lot of people following, but then you get these specific people. In this case, it's a paralytic, but just after, and his friends. Just after this, you get Levi, the tax collector.
Which I think is really interesting, because Jesus is walking by and he sees Levi sitting in the tax booth.
Yeah.
And then he calls him and he comes out, but there's a distinction there that I think is really interesting.
Come out from the crowd.
Yeah. So there's people who kind of present themselves like the paralytic and his friends coming down through the roof. It's like, they just like bust on the scene. But then there's something about Levi sitting in the tax, like in the booth, and Jesus seeing him that I think is really interesting. That there's something that distinguishes him to Jesus.
So I don't know how that, right.
Yeah.
So so this brings up what you're talking about, and we'll see how far down this rabbit path we go. but brings up an interesting theological tension. And that is Jesus choosing people based on some quality that they may have, or is he qualifying them by choosing them? And it's a kind of a question of around the gospel and how you view it. Does Jesus choose me because of some willingness or capacity to surrender that I may possess? I'm less inclined to think of it like that. I think depending on how you view free will and the sovereign choice of God has a lot to do with this. If you just think that God just chooses people, what I like about that notion is that it takes me completely out of the equation. I didn't offer anything. It wasn't where I came from or who I am or some quality that I maybe possessed. Almost like Jesus just looking at Levi and saying, you, calling you completely out of what you were in and just making you something else completely. What I love about that is the pure graceness of it, if I can use that phrase. He just chose me, and it's awesome. Now that brings into question, wait a minute, what about people who aren't chosen? Okay, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
We could have that another time. But so what constitutes a call? But it does seem to me, right, that there's, and you're going to see this in Mark 3, that there's all these people clamoring to be around Jesus. And then there are certain people who are singled out with a different kind of faith. And I don't know what the readiness is in them, that they're at a place that maybe is different than just people who just trying to get around Jesus to get what they can get from him because they need something. And Jesus, quite frankly, has compassion on a lot of those folks. And we don't know the state of all their hearts or what happened there, but it is interesting that there are these different people who are highlighted for a certain kind of quality. Faith is one of those that's used here in Mark 2, but you're going to see it later with the woman with the issue of blood. You're going to see it with the Roman centurion. There's different folks who have this kind of, and then there's Jairus and his daughter, and Jairus just kind of seems along for the ride. I don't know. I was looking at this story today, so we don't have to go there. We can talk about it. Well, we'll see. I'll be curious how I feel about it when I get there.
Yeah.
But point being, right, there does seem to be some distinction between some folks and the way they respond to Jesus, their willingness to be identified or to get close. Maybe you might even say their submissiveness, right? So what do I mean by that? Like when Jesus tells the paralytic, son, your sins are forgiven, he doesn't really get, there's no response recorded. We don't know what his response was, but he clearly takes it, if you will. Like he accepts it.
Yeah.
He receives it. And so there's a deeper ministry and healing that goes on there. And it's just fascinating to me. I don't think Jesus is just using him as an example. I think he's also working to bless this man really deeply in that he gets something that perhaps others don't get, which just purely got physical healing. He gets a deeper transformation of the soul. Your sins are forgiven. Now that's available to all of us, right? We know that, but here in this, not everybody gets that one.
Yeah.
Son, your sins are forgiven. It's a profound thing that happens in him, and he seems capable of receiving it. And it seems to be on the basis of faith. When he saw their faith, he said to them, son, your sins are forgiven. So I think that, we could talk about what that faith is. I described it this weekend as belief in action, but there's this certain, what is it? I'm kind of getting to my third point, but this determination to get in front of Jesus, but more than just to get what I need, but because it's a deep trust that he has. And not more than that, he is what I need.
I was reading in Jesus the King today, and Tim Keller was talking about this idea of like if you were falling off a cliff. He may have gotten it from somewhere else, but if you're falling off a cliff and you were falling backwards, you would, and there was a branch hanging out from the side. Do you remember this?
No.
Okay, so if there's a branch hanging out, then you you wouldn't say, I wonder if that branch could hold my weight.
Yeah.
You would reach out for the branch regardless because it's the only hope that you have. And so I think that you see these people in the Gospel of Mark that they're maybe falling off of some, and they're like, I don't know, I don't have any other choice but to reach for the only thing that I think I could find like that could help me or save me. And some people distinguish themselves, but I think it's because Jesus and Mark in this gospel account have that agenda in mind to reveal that Jesus is God.
So are you saying that perhaps there's some folks who are more ready to accept that revelation than others?
Yes,
Yeah.
because there are, like,
Yeah,
you just
I agree.
see it here. And you see, like, and the crowds are seeing what other people are experiencing. And so there is this question that people need to ask, like, who am I? Am I just in the crowd, or am I the person that's going to reach out for Jesus? Not because, like, yes, I think that Jesus is so good that in our desperation of what we think we need, he actually will, like, meet us in that place, but he'll go, a layer deeper for sure, because he's a good doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what were you going to say, Lindsay?
Oh, I just totally agree. I think that these are people who are ready, or maybe they don't have words for it, but their faith is expressing who Jesus is to them.
That's a great way to say it.
That
Their
is.
faith is expressing who Jesus is. And maybe it hasn't even dawned on them,
Yeah.
but there's a certain
That this is
knowing and certainty
They
that
would-
if I just get in front of him,
Yeah.
it's going to be okay.
They would have known the same prophecies and things of one to come. And so for them, I
Certainly.
think, there's a level of faith that's being expressed here. That we'll see in chapter 8 with the disciples, that they'll kind of step into that fully and express it with words. But these people are expressing it through action, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really
They're
good.
ready to say who he is.
Yeah.
I think about the people that are probably coming into a service on a weekend and they think they're coming for one thing. But what they're finding is something very different. And so, or not very different, but it's just different from what they thought. Can you speak to a little bit around how we might come in with these, like, presenting problems, but Jesus wants to address our deeper need, and what that might look like for, I don't know, somebody who's maybe new to faith and hoping that, oh man, my family's going to get better, or my finances are going to get better.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So as the story goes, the paralytic is carried by 4 men. They tear a hole in the roof, lower him down in front of Jesus. Jesus sees their faith, or sees, their faith, it's plural, and then says to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." Now, I think that's a really important line there, because he is fully aware of why this man is there. He's paralyzed. He's come for healing. But he offers him something, or gives him something deeper and better than what he came hoping for. And I think it's, we've talked about this several times before on this podcast, that there's a reality so much bigger than this one that we're in, that is the biblical point of view. And that we tend to make kind of the beginning and the end of our own lives as the sum total of what matters and what's important, what we can touch, what we're currently experiencing, as if it will last forever. But the scriptures, and maybe more so the New Testament, don't think of it that way at all. Maybe even particularly suffering is always described as temporal, something that is light, doesn't last forever. I know that feels dismissive, perhaps. I don't intend it to, and I don't think the scriptures intend it to, of what you're going through. But it's just, we make an eternity out of a present temporal reality. And so Jesus here addresses, fully aware of kind of the real the real situation of things, addresses the deeper problem, and he talks about sin. So the biblical conception of humanity is that humanity, though made in the image of God, has been enslaved to sin and thereby is under the power of the devil. That's, if you want to get technical about it like that, we don't talk much about that part. We're fine with the sin and the whole kind of legal parts of this, but we don't really get into the whole you kind of belong to the devil thing. Why? And Michael Heiser is helpful around this, that the devil operates the realm of the dead because he is, and I'm trying to remember how he gets there, but like he's the sort of lord of this kind of underworld, and because everyone dies, they all enter into the authority or domain of the devil. So like Colossians 1, where Paul describes he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom. He's describing these two different kingdoms, one of darkness and one of light. Ephesians 2, he talks about the sons of disobedience. Think about that. Sons denoting family. You are a part of a family. In the same way that like I can not love my family, but I can't change like that they are my family. This is what I was born into one way or the other. So he calls us sons of disobedience. And what is the specific language like?
Children of wrath?
Children of wrath. That's another one, but he talks about being under the spirit of the power of the air or something like this.
Yeah.
Again, referring to the devil. We're going to get into some of this potentially. We'll see in this next week when Jesus talks about he's accused of doing miracles by the power of the devil, and he talks about the strong man and binding the strong man and plundering his house, which is what Jesus does. He alone has the power. That's one of the things that you see right from the beginning of Mark's gospel, is that he has power over darkness, over demonic powers, and that he can go to this prince of demons, bind him, and plunder his possessions. Well, that's us. I think that's Ephesians 4, captivity captive, gave gifts to men. He's leading people out of their captivity. So anyway, there's this sin piece. Son, your sins are forgiven. You are a slave to sin under the headship of the devil. That's the kingdom and the family that you belong to, but I'm pulling you out of all of this. So your situation is dire. You cannot overcome this master. He's too powerful for you. Mankind can't fix itself. So this is where Jesus, God himself, has to show up to pull his people out of it. It's a different kind of, we call it an atonement theory that comes from Christus Victor. It's the idea of Jesus as champion. Carmen made a song about it. It's actually got some accuracy to it, like fighting defeating the devil. Yeah. And so anyway, that's the idea. But anyway, he's dealing with this guy's deepest problem that he can't fix or cure himself. Now, we live in a kind of psychological age, right, where we want to attribute, we have reasons for personality flaws or proclivities. You're defensive because you didn't get approval from your dad or your mom or your whatever you're looking for. And I think some of that is so true. But also,
there's reasons for why you are the way that you are.
Yeah.
But you have a responsibility for why you are the way that you are.
And I would also say you're a slave to sin.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the notion. So you're made. So this is
you can't fix it.
Yeah. So it's this two realities kind of thing, or two truths. You are made in the image of likeness of God, which makes you inherently valuable, and there's a goodness in you that whether you believe in Christ or not, to want to reflect your creator. So human beings have, this is what we find, human beings, and we know this to be true, have capacity for unbelievable good and also unbelievable evil. And the long arc of our lives, I think what the scriptures would say, though you might do good things, the long arc of your life and humanity trends toward evil, not toward good. Ultimately, you're dominated by good or by evil, and you can't escape it. That's the condition of humanity. And so when he's when he's dealing with this paralytic, he's dealing with the deepest issue. Now, you asked for like practical examples of this. Well, it happens. So wherever there is conflict in our lives, wherever there is brokenness, and we're bringing our need to Jesus, these are all places, I would say, or you might call them opportunities, where reality might be revealed to you in a new way. What do I mean by that? I mean that I might say, Lord, heal my marriage, but then he might, Lord, my husband, and perhaps like he's been cheating on you. I get it. Like maybe something has been done to you, but maybe in the processing of all of that before the Lord and submitting that to him, maybe you're going to find not that it was your fault, but that there's some things in you that need to be addressed. And our propensity is going to want to be, yeah, but them, him, that, fix that. And often he's going to be like, yeah, let's deal with this. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about, and so I think that happens when we get before the Lord, is that's how it's not always just pointing out your flaws, but it's healing you from the thing that's really causing ultimately a deeper, let's call it a downstream brokenness, where the real problem is upstream, and we got to get in there and deal with it. So the way I said it this weekend is he's unwilling to treat the symptom and leave the disease untouched. We got to get to the root of the problem, and that's what he's doing here.
And then is it the religious leaders? I can't remember what. They take issue with that.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, so they say basically, who can forgive? He's blaspheming. This won't be the first time that they accuse him of that. He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? And as I said this weekend, they're not wrong. They are right. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Where they're wrong is that their question, they don't realize who they're sitting with, who they're observing here. And so so what I said this weekend is fascinating. I had some folks come up to me and tell me they'd not heard this before, and I hadn't really thought of it before either. And this isn't my own thought, because obviously I didn't search the entire Old Testament to verify whether or not this is true. Someone else did. But that in the Old Testament, forgiveness of sins is not the purview of any man. It's not the high priest's job. Even on the Day of Atonement, he's not given he is not the one who can forgive the sins of the people. That's something that happens that God does. The Messiah, even though, isn't said in all the descriptions of who this one to come will be. He's not given. He's never described as having capacity to forgive sins.
Yeah,
that doesn't make him.
Because
I'm not trying to devalue or the role of Messiah.
Right.
I'm just saying the Messiah was seen to be a servant of Yahweh, and he was going to be this greater David who is going to even serve God more faithfully. So, but they didn't have a category for a divine Messiah, God himself showing up. I mean, it's there in the text.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of Psalm 51, where he says, against you and you alone have I sinned. And the one who confers forgiveness would necessarily be the one who was sinned against.
That's right.
And so it makes sense that would be God.
So from a Christian perspective, what we can say is that God is first in line of the aggrieved in all sins.
Yes. And that doesn't mean that somebody else wasn't sinned
right.
against. Yes.
All sin, God's the first one who's been sinned against. I'm not just talking about sort of the first sin way back when was committed against God. I'm talking about your sin today. You're lying to someone. The first step in all of that is that you have sinned against God, not just what you've done to this other person. That's my point.
Yeah.
And so therefore, the only person who can deal with that is the one who is first aggrieved in the situation. So he's the one that has the only one that has the capacity to deal with the problem.
Okay.
So what we're seeing here is that Jesus is saying, and this I think will be news to some folks, but that Jesus isn't crucified because he claims to be Messiah. He is crucified because he claims to be God. That's what really gets him. It's not he's Messiah, but he just keeps putting himself in the place of God. And that just drives them. They just can't take it. And that's why they go out. And what he's doing even in chapter 3, when there's like they go out and start plotting with the Herodians, he's claiming, like when he says, I'm Lord of the Sabbath, that's not just Messiah language, that's God language. And he's going to keep doing that again and again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that makes me think of something completely unrelated, but well, maybe a little bit, but just this Mark 1:35 where it says that he goes to this desolate place and he's praying, and then Peter comes and he says, everybody's looking for you. And he goes, okay, let's go over here. And Jesus is so deeply convinced of who he is and what he was sent to do, that it just necessarily upsets people who maybe...
Well, he just doesn't fit expectations, which would just be, he's going to run cross-grain to your culture, to your preferences, to your ideas, even of right and wrong in some places, where you're just going to be like, oh, you can't do that. Well, he just did.
Yeah.
So he gets to be the one that defines these things. We conform to him, not the other way around.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this idea when Jesus confronts us, there is always going to be some sort of resistance in us to that confrontation. And I think that underneath that resistance, you could say that it's pride. Yep. Typically, pride is just always there.
Yep.
But I think there's also some fear.
Yeah.
When Jesus invites us to trust him, it is on the basis of faith. You don't get any guarantees in like a natural kind of sense. You get something like Jesus, when he invites you into this life with him, there's no guarantee that it's going to turn out the way that you would prefer for it to turn out. And
you have to be, let's call it, curious enough to go on that adventure and to find out.
Yeah, or desperate.
Yeah, or desperate. Well, that's right.
Yeah.
I've thought about that. So I read my Bible reading for today, put me in John 1, and it's, come and see. Come and see a couple times. Come and see. Just let's go see. And what that simple invitation would mean in their lives, where it would take them. I mean, you got to think, like, if you go all the way to the end of their life and then just like who they are, what they experienced and what they saw and how they died and all of it. I mean, like all of it goes back to this one decision. Come and see. Okay, I'll go. Yeah. Let's just go see what happens if I follow this guy. Let's go see what happens if I get near him. And when you do that, but you kind of have to be willing to press past what's comfortable, and your fears to be able to experience that. It's an adventure, a calling of faith, a journey into the unknown. Abraham, go to a land I'll show you. Let's go see what that's like. Who knows where that is? But I bet it'll be good.
Yeah. So what I thought was really cool, because I'm kind of a nerd, is seeing the picture of the house this weekend. And I didn't realize, one, that they brought the animals inside. Maybe I had heard that before, but just like, I feel like that would be real stinky.
It is.
And you just...
So they would usually be a lower space and an upper space. And I could be wrong about this, so don't take my word 100%, but I think I might be right. When it says that there's no room in the inn,
right? That's what I was thinking.
It's the lower level, I think, or maybe there's a guest quarters in the house. And then maybe that means that Mary and Joseph were down with the animals in their feeding trough and so forth. So it could be a couple things there. I need to go back and research that, but It's not a hotel. That I do know.
I had heard that before, so I was wondering about that specifically. Like,
so you might have had like a place where you say, this is where guests, so here's where the family is, and then if a guest comes, this is where we're going to put them, and that would be technically the inn.
Yeah.
And since there's no room there, then they're sleeping down with the animals,
Okay.
which is why the baby, Jesus, is put in a trough, a feeding trough, a manger. Yeah, because you would stay with relatives. That's what you do.
Yeah.
So there were other relatives there. Then it's interesting because the biblical writers, they only give you the details that they want you to have.
Right.
So
right.
it's like
and then,
all this other stuff that who else was there? What was going on? You don't know.
Yeah, it is.
It
is interesting that there was some details that are included seem to be indicative of an eyewitness like encounter, or like they're relaying, like when they say Jesus was sleeping on a pillow in the boat.
Oh, yeah.
That's very specific to that story, and there's no need to include details like that unless somebody was recounting something that they saw.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense for them to put it in there unless they saw it.
Yeah.
Because writing back then was very,
like
you're not wasting ink.
Yeah.
You're not trying to
Paper's
hit
limited, right?
a
We don't
certain word count. No.
Yeah.
So, okay. And then there's stairs, like going
outside the house and going up to the
up
roof.
to the roof.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's helpful. So, I mean, you can kind of see how this happens. So they're not, breaking into a house like yours.
Yeah.
Or mine, right, with shingles and all this, but it's
but there's
it's a thatched roof,
thatching.
and there'd be mud put over that to kind of create an impervious surface. Peter in Acts chapter 10 is said to go up on a roof, and he's sleeping in the afternoon, and you could imagine, it's a nice, especially Joppa's by the sea, kind of nice.
Yeah.
Sitting outside.
It'd be really nice.
Yeah, it'd be really nice, like a patio.
So it's something that can hold weight, sustain weight.
That's right.
But,
Well, apparently 5 people got up there.
But at the same time, they're like, we need to get through there.
Yeah.
We can rip the thing apart.
How they did that, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
I assume there had to be some tools involved just to at least kind of break through the mud, maybe a rock or something, but just like to get through there
Yeah.
and pull that back. And it's going to be pretty messy down below because everything's going to start dropping. I mean, you start breaking up mud, you can imagine what that's like.
That just does speak to, in a more general sense, how wild these people were or how much they wanted to get to Jesus, or how intense the crowds might have been.
So I being a Michael Jordan fan from the 90s, I've watched the Last Dance documentary multiple times. It's so good. And, one of the amazing things about it is that, especially at that time, there's no social media. People can't follow each other online. There are crowds of people trying to get to Michael everywhere he goes. And their willingness, to bust past security or to try to figure out what room he's in, just to get a glimpse, just to get close. Okay, here's an example. Yeah. I was at the 2005 NCAA national championship game, basketball, the NCAA tournament game. I had a buddy who had tickets, and we got to go. It was in St. Louis. It was Illinois versus North Carolina. So 2005, MJ had only been retired from the Bulls. In fact, he might have been playing with the Wizards at that time. I'm trying to think, or might have just retired. I can't remember. But he stopped playing in 97, 98 for the Bulls. It's not that long after that. So it's North Carolina. He's there. And I, being a massive fan, I get I don't know how I know. This is pre-iPhone, obviously. I'm he's over. I'm sitting kind of across the arena from him. And I don't know how I figured it out, but he's in this suite, and you can kind of just make it out. And so I'm going over there. So I did. I left my seat. I make my way around the arena, and I'm going up, getting in that section, trying to walk up the steps up to, because the I don't know, the suite that he's in, kind of, it's like the suite, and then just below it would be, rows of people. In fact, there's some people who are sitting there, and it's there's a wall right behind them, and then that's MJ, and I'm how amazing would that have been? So I'm trying to get up there, and they have security in the aisle. This is because I'm not the only one trying to do this, right? People are I got to get up there and get close to him. I just want to see this guy.
Yeah.
Because I'd not been, I'd seen him play once before, maybe twice before. I I just wanted to get close.
You just want to get close. So you don't want to say anything to him necessarily. Like,
I mean, I just want to be up there and be like, it's him. I mean, this is my childhood icon. You know, I wanted to get close to him. And yeah, so you can imagine, I mean, Mark is describing scenes like this. People getting wild. What do I got to do? You know, how could I get in front of this guy? And you really get a lot of that in chapter 3. But here, I mean, too, it's just like, do we need to tear the roof off? Let's do it.
Yeah.
It's just but there's something deeper, obviously, going on with these people. They just will not be denied. And it's not just like a personal curiosity, right? I mean, it's more than just, I want his autograph. It's, I like the way you said it earlier, Lindsay. There's something in there. He could see something in their faith that maybe they even themselves weren't fully aware of.
Yeah.
I think you get the same thing with the woman with the issue of blood. Just a certain, I don't know, I just need to get in front of him. And there's a reward that comes with that. The Yiddish word for it is chutzpah. It's this, I'm going to just go for it because I just kind of know that it's going to be good. And so, you know, they do some audacious thing. But everywhere that this happens, and you do get it several places, the Syrophoenician woman, you get these people who are kind of like, they kind of break the rules, if you will. It's not the rule breaking that the Lord loves. Not that it's bad so much as it is the...
Well, they're social norms. It's not
social
necessarily...
norms, right. They're not breaking commandments. But they are kind of violating social norms.
Yeah.
And even in the case of the Syrophoenician woman, pressing past Jesus' own objections to her getting anything from him.
Yeah.
And she's just like, I'm not taking no for an answer.
Yeah, I think
you are going to do something for me. And he's like, I like you.
Yeah, I think that's so good. Like, and if you think about the disciples, sometimes they're the ones who are the guards.
Yes.
They're like standing around, like making sure
keep those kids away. Watch
exactly. And there's
and they're always wrong.
Who are like unwilling to take no for an answer. Like, we will get to Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he does love that. He
always
rewards that. It always comes with a great reward. And so I think about like, okay, what would happen if I took on maybe just a piece of that mentality? That the Lord is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And what I would say to anyone listening, maybe particularly to the, I think the Lord loves just like a bold child who's just like, doesn't know the protocol, but is just so willing to just walk up and be like, I'm going to ask you for this.
My question is like, what does that look like though for us? Like, you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think it means you don't have to know how to pray perfectly.
Yeah.
And you don't have to have all the verses memorized, and you don't have to have been in church for a long time to just be desperate enough to get in front of Jesus. I think the Lord honors and loves our fervor and desire to get near him, even when we're not following all the sort of protocol and expectations, and we get the words wrong or whatever, and we're kind of fumbling our way through it. But man, he just likes seeing us. Like when you're in that place of like, but nothing can stop me.
And other people might think you're a little weird.
Exactly. That's true. So true, but so good.
I know. Yeah.
And quite frankly, I think that a lot of the people who are more, let's call it this, more respectable, don't get much from Jesus. They treasure their respectability. What would happen if people knew I went to a Katharos group to deal with lust? Like there's healing to be had. I'm just not going there. That's too embarrassing. What would happen if people knew or found out, or if I told somebody that we were having problems or whatever, or that my kid's got a drug addiction or whatever? It's like we're too respectable and buttoned up to be like, I need Jesus, and I will do what it takes to get in front of him. So I think when when you're willing to say, I'll do whatever, I think the Lord loves that and meets people there.
Yeah, he totally does. And he will absolutely change your life if you let him.